name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Disturb us, Lord, when we are
I
too
can.
pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrive safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things that we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. Morning, magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Maayong buntag, inyong tanan. Okay. Um, I'd like to go back to the prayer I read in the beginning. This is a prayer attributed to Sir Francis Drake. I think he was an English explorer, and I like the prayer attributed to him because it reminds us not to seek false sources of comfort. It tells us that our faith calls us to always move out into the deep, not to be complacent, not to be uh, laid back, but to move out into the deep. And we know that any sort of depth can only come from the process of our lives. And so today, for our reflection on Good Friday, I would like to share some thoughts on the theme of uh, salvation and the cross. So in this short conference, we shall try to uh, make sense of the experience of suffering, which we all share in, no? Hindi naman wala namang exempted sa karanasan ng pagpasan ng sarili nating mga krus. Let's go back to the experience of Palm Sunday. Okay, we started our Holy Week with this very special celebration. Palm Sunday ushers the church into the holiest of days, the Holy Week. And the climax of this Holy Week is our remembering, our commemoration of the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Now, before the pandemic hit us, one priest observed that in the Philippines, church attendance usually increases on Palm Sunday. No? Biglang dumadami ang tao, biglang maraming magsisimba. Now he says that one probable reason for this is the what he calls the palm drama. The palm drama. Even children are excited about going to church. Why? Because of the experience of having something in their hands. And you see even vendors around churches and offering, diba? Offering elaborately designed palms for the taking of the faithful. So Palm Sunday, and maybe we can speak of the same for the rest of Holy Week. Palm Sunday carries a lot of drama, and the waving of the palms inevitably evoke images. And what are these images? Images of the festive entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. So you can imagine the scene similar to that of a king returning from battle and entering his city triumphantly. And people are exploding in joy, seeing a very triumphant king coming back into the center of their empire. Now, the triumphant entry of Jesus could have had carried political overtones. Why? Because some people expected him to liberate them from the Romans. So you can imagine a lot of probably shouting and cheering, people waving palms, and in the accounts we know that some of them laid their robes on the road for the donkey to step on, like a king returning to his seat. But you know what's different about Palm Sunday? Because during Palm Sunday, you actually have what we call the bringing together of images of triumph, yes, but also on the other hand, images of tragedy. Diba? Did you notice in the first part of the liturgy, there was this commemoration of the triumphant entry. But when you go into the Mass, when you listen to the readings, and especially the Gospel, what do you hear? You listen to the account of the Passion. So, so the liturgy actually brings together what I call the opposite ends of the spectrum of human experience. You have, on the one hand, triumph, but on the other, failure. On the one hand, exuberant joy, but on the other hand, also a lot of pain and suffering. So parang kung titignan mo, oh, in fact, the title of the liturgical celebration last Sunday is by itself almost paradoxical, di ba? Anong tawag sa liturgy nung Sunday? Palm Sunday of the Passion of the Lord. You have palm, and then you have passion. You have something that is festive, but at the same time, you have something that prepares you for the scandal of the cross. And I think you can say, that the Holy Week, which begins with Palm Sunday, is somehow a microcosm of our life. Di ba ganun din ang ating buhay? On the one hand, you have experiences of triumph, but on the other hand, you also have painful, difficult experiences to go through. On the one hand, you feel very happy and you are able to reach emotional high in certain experiences that are very positive. For example, when children finish school, when business thrives, when you love a person and that person loves you back. These are experiences of joy. Pero pag minahal mo at hindi ka minahal, unrequited love, that is the opposite end of the spectrum of human experience. Because on the other end, you also experience death of a loved one. You experience sickness. You see young people uh, wallowing in addiction. You have experiences of plans not happening as you expect. You experience betrayal in the family or even among your friends. Di ba? Sari-saring karanasan na hindi lang pawang magaganda. On the other hand, we also experience pain and misery. No? Para sa mga plantita, when your plants dry up, no matter what you do. So these things happen. And I think in some ways, Palm Sunday, in the context of the liturgy, uh, brings about these what I call the opposite ends of the spectrum of human experience. Now, no matter what we say, I think even among philosophers and theologians through the centuries, they have all affirmed the fact that suffering is very mysterious. Pag sinabing mysterious, what do we exactly mean? Pag sinabing misteryo buo, anong pumapasok sa iyong isipan? When we say mystery, we affirm that there is something that we do not completely understand. There is something that uh, is, is similar to the experience of having water inside your palm, that it cannot stay there, it just simply overflows. You cannot hold it. You cannot keep it to yourself and claim that you fully understand. Mys- um, Mystery is different from a problem, so that we say that suffering is not a problem because problems have solutions. However, we know that suffering is something that comes with life. Kung tela pa, it's like a thread that is actually woven into the fabric itself. You cannot completely eradicate it. If it's a problem, then you can find solutions. But we know that in life, suffering inevitably comes. Hindi natin pwedeng takasan, hindi natin pwedeng takbuhan. And so because you cannot solve it, what do you do? What do you do with suffering, Tibet? You learn to live with it. You learn to embrace it. And hopefully, as you go through life, you also learn through it. Sometimes we learn better the hard way, isn't it? Sometimes we learn better the hard way. But for a Christian, the most powerful image for suffering is the cross. Kaya nga sa ating, even in our day-to-day conversations, we always say, yan ang krus ko. My husband is my cross. My responsibilities are my crosses. So we associate our difficulties, we associate our challenges, we associate our sufferings with the image of the cross. And so I think this invites us to go back to how it begins, no? And look at the meaning of the cross, especially as Jesus himself experienced it. Now, if we ask, what do we know about the cross? Especially as the crucifixion was practiced during the time of Jesus by the Romans. Now, historians would tell us that crucifixion was the capital punishment that was designed by the Romans. So today, when we talk about capital punishment in criminal law, you are thinking about ano pa sa atin when it was restored? Lethal injection, right? Before we had um, electric chair. Okay. And then later they wanted to make it more humane. Is there anything humane about killing a person? They wanted to shift to lethal injection. But during the height of the Roman Empire, they used the crucifixion as a form of capital punishment. And the, the crucifixion was designed in such a way that it would inflict optimal physical pain. the physical pain, no, was something that was ensured every step of the way in the entire process of crucifixion. Some years back, we might have all watched the film The Passion of Christ. And I think in a very graphic way, that film, to some extent, powerfully captures the kind of physical pain that was inflicted on the one going to be crucified. I remember I was watching it with my mother, and inside the movie house, I think she only watched about 20% of the film because she was covering her eyes. She couldn't take the images of soldiers abusing physically and even torturing mentally uh, our Lord. Pero what was special about the design was that it was carefully calculated. Every step of the way was carefully calculated to keep the person from passing out so that the person would endure the pain longer. So parang pahihirapan ka, pero sinisiguro na hindi ka mawalan ng malay para mas tumagal ang iyong paghihirap. Now, if you study how it was done, you also realize that the capital punishment of crucifixion was designed by the Romans not only to inflict optimal physical pain, but also even more to humiliate the person. When we look at the cross, what do we see? Uh, we see Jesus, the body of Jesus, especially around the waist and down, wrapped by some kind of cloth. But that is already, how do you say, parang pinaganda na lang at Tibet. Hindi talaga ganoon. Because it was designed to be an instrument of humiliation. So imagine Jesus was stripped so that they would be able to expose his genitals before the public. And not only that, he was positioned in such a way that it would loosen his bowels. So hindi ka lang hubot-hubad. Binitay ka in such a way na matatai ka. One of the most beautiful phrases I have read about uh, the crucifixion or about the death of Jesus was, I don't know if this comes from, I'm not sure now. If there's a theologian listening, maybe he can or she can uh, correct me. I think it comes from Hans Urs von Balthasar. He said, the redeemed never knew how deep were the waters crossed. The redeemed never knew how deep were the waters crossed. Kasi talagang kung iisipin mo, napakahirap nung dinaanan ng Panginoon. It was so unthinkable. Not only on the level of physical pain, but also to the extent that you are being abused. It's not like, it's not just parang making the body suffer. It's like killing your soul little by little. And so clearly, the crucifixion had humiliation in mind. And today, we tend to downplay this aspect, both in our preaching and in our art. Jürgen Moltmann, a famous Protestant theologian, said that today we surround our crosses with roses. And we like put on what he calls uh, aesthetic and antiseptic wrapping towels, but does not really pay justice to what the Lord experienced. That was not the case for him. His nakedness was exposed. His body was publicly humiliated. And that is among many reasons why the crucifixion was such a devastating blow to the disciples. That many of them abandoned Jesus even before it started because they knew what was going to happen. They simply couldn't connect this kind of humiliation with glory, with divinity, with triumph. Um, while I was preparing for this recollection, I came across a statement from one of the more famous spiritual writers in North America today. His name is Father Ron Rolheiser. He said something like, uh, some of our sicknesses today function in a very similar way to the crucifixion. I'd like to read with you. Maybe you can follow me by looking at the slide. He says, interestingly, there is a striking parallel between what crucifixion did to the human body and what nature itself often does to the human body through old age, cancer, dementia, AIDS, the pandemic, and other diseases, because such sicknesses humiliate the body before killing it. He says, these sicknesses expose publicly what is most vulnerable inside our humanity. These sicknesses shame the body. And how true, di po ba? In your younger years, you would uh, experience a lot of appreciation about how you look, about how beautiful you are. Di ba, Leila? And then sicknesses come. And then, for some reason, nature allows deterioration of the body because we are sick. And little by little, you see yourself literally shrinking and becoming someone you don't almost recognize. And then you die. I'm sure for many of us, we would rather prefer dying handsome and beautiful. Kasi many times when we look at the body inside the coffin, parang di ba, minsan sasabihin natin, ako, parang hindi na siya. Parang pumayat at parang ibang tao na ang ating nakikita. They expose publicly what is most vulnerable inside of our humanity. They shame the body. In the case of Jesus, it was not just physical pain and humiliation. It was also the experience of betrayal. Betrayal by his closest friends and associates. Uh, there was a post at Facebook which got my attention. It says the painful thing about betrayal is that it is not committed by your enemies. It is committed by your friends. And we know this from the account of the Passion narrative, no? The kiss by Judas, the denial by Peter, the abandonment by his disciples. And some writers say that there is no human experience more painful than betrayal. Betrayal is very difficult to experience, very challenging to go through. Why? Because it hurts us several times over. In what sense? First, because it hurts us when it is discovered. And then it hurts us over and over again. Every time we remember those moments that we know now that were never genuine. You are married, and then suddenly you discover that your husband has been into an illicit relationship for 5 years now. So you get hurt the moment you discover it. And then every time you remember in the past 5 years that all those intimate moments you had together were all fake. When a loved one, for example, dies, we can take comfort, we can draw some kind of consolation from the thought that this person has gone back to her creator and is now perfectly at peace. But when a husband betrays the wife, there is hardly anything that one can hold on to for consolation because betrayal hits us where it is most painful. For Jesus, it must have been hard to accept that no, Judas exchanged their friendship for how much? 30 pieces of silver. So, in a sense, greed and maybe disappointed ambition on the part of Judas negated everything that they shared together. But you know, the denial by Peter, however, must have hurt him more deeply because he was especially close to Peter. He would bring Peter to very uh, intimate moments, uh, like when he would bring him to the scene of the transfiguration, for example. Jesus had high hopes on the rock, as it were. He had expectations for the future of the community because he placed this future on the shoulders of this man. And then he denied him. Now, having said uh, all those, we now focus our attention on the salvation that was brought about by Christ. One of the prayers that we always hear during Holy Week when we watch people doing the way of the cross is the prayer that begins each station. Diba? What was the prayer? It says, "We adore you, Christ, and we bless you, for by your holy cross you have redeemed the world." Many theologians today say that our salvation was not brought about by the suffering of Jesus per se. Um, so not the physical or the emotional or the mental pain by themselves that was salvific. What was salvific was the attitude behind the experience, the attitude that Jesus maintained all throughout his perfect obedience to the Father. We find a highlight of this in his prayer at the Garden of Gethsemane when he says, "Father, take away this cup of suffering from me." He must have felt very scared. "Take away this cup of suffering from me. but not my will, but yours be done. It's a prayer that perhaps we can all say, whenever we are confronted by our own difficulties. Lord, I am very scared. I'm very scared of an operation that I'm about to go through. I'm very scared about the diagnosis of the doctor that I have Alzheimer's disease. I'm very scared. So please, if it is possible, take away this cup of suffering from me. And then Jesus says, but not my will, but yours be done. The perfect obedience of Christ. So that we can say that the cross is not an isolated event in the life of Christ. The cross is simply what? The climax, the highest point of a perfectly obedient life lived from the very beginning. And I like the way, and I like this particular way of understanding our redemption. Kasi if you isolate your suffering, the suffering of Jesus, if you say that we are saved by the suffering alone, what does it, what picture does it give us of the Father? Diba? If suffering alone saves, it makes the Father look like a bloodthirsty deity. But if you look at suffering, but the attitude in the heart of Christ that was very evident all throughout and was experienced as a highlight in the crucifixion, we know that what was salvific was not just the cross, but the entire life of Christ spent in absolute obedience to the Father. Kasi somehow, theologians would say, the perfect obedience of Christ reversed the disobedience of Adam. If the disobedience of Adam caused the fall, the perfect obedience of Christ reversed the fall and changed altogether the direction of human history. Instead of all of us condemned, the perfect obedience of Jesus made possible a return to the way of salvation. So when we say, for by your holy cross you have redeemed the world, we're actually saying, for the perfect obedience brought to climax in the cross, you have redeemed the world. And that is what St. Paul said in his letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, verse 8. He says, he humbled himself and became obedient. Obedient from the beginning unto death, even when death was by means very difficult to go through, and that is the cross. That is why St. Paul also would say, those who died with Christ will also rise with him. So it doesn't mean that we need to be crucified as well. What it means is that we adopt the attitude of perfect obedience, dying to ourselves every day, dying to what we want because we want to follow the will of God. Those who died with Christ will also rise with him. If we suffer, we will also share in the resurrection of Jesus. Obedience is easy to say, but it is extremely difficult to do. Obedience to God is sounds almost cliche, but when you start taking it seriously, lo and behold, you will have to carry your crosses. Last Monday, we had a renewal of our priestly promises during Christmas. And I was seated somewhere, and the bishop started asking, in the ritual, started asking, do you renew your promise to live a chaste life? Ay, lakas ang sagot ko noon na Tibet. Oh. But when the bishop said, do you renew your promise to be respectful of me and be obedient to me and to my successors, parang ayaw kong sumagot. Oh, sometimes suddenly it becomes very difficult because it requires subduing your own desires. It requires submitting yourself to the wisdom of someone you don't always agree with. And how much more when we are trying to live our Christian life, when we do not really see God talking to us directly. Then when we have to discern all the time whether it is will or not, then that makes it even more difficult for us. But there is the promise that says, if we are obedient to God and we suffer, we will also share in the resurrection of Jesus. And then we bring the question today, no? Because we are looking at eternal reward, di ba? We obey, we follow, we carry our own cross, and we are looking to eternal reward. But even today, we can ask, besides eternal redemption, what does suffering do to us? What does suffering do to us? Is there anything good that can come from our pains? Is there anything good about taking care of a sick person? Is there anything good that comes out of us going through the motions of serving our children and not even feeling that we are being appreciated? Is there anything good that can come from our sufferings and our difficulties? What do you think, Maan? Is there anything good that can come from it? Um, I'd like to say that from the point of view of human experience, from what we know and what we go through, um, yes, our answer would be yes. There's something good that can come out of our difficulties, and that is depth of character. Depth of character. In one of his many talks, I distinctly remember His Eminence, no, Cardinal Chito, saying that a person does not attain substance without some form of suffering. How do we obtain our coffee in the morning? How do you produce your coffee in the morning? Paano nga ba? You just tell your house help, gawin mo ako ng kape. No? And then they know exactly what to do. But in the past, whenever you want to drink coffee, that presumes a lot of hard work prior to your actual drinking. Tatanim ka, mag-aantay ka ng 6 na buwan, tapos pipitasin mo. Pagkatapos ibibilad mo. And then, what else? You submit it to grinding, and then you cook it. So it will take you about 6 months and a half before you can drink your coffee. But when you drink it, because it comes from hard work, it tastes better. Today, you have a lot of options. No? You have instant coffee, you have brewed coffee, you have plenty of brands to choose from. You have Boss Coffee, Starbucks, Figaro. You can have the kind of coffee that you want anytime, no sweat, easily. All you need probably is a few hundreds. And I believe that it is, in a sense, symptomatic of what's going on today. Thanks to the breakthrough of science and technology, things have become a lot more easy for us. And this is not by itself wrong. We have gotten used to getting things very easily, so that we want everything to be convenient. Even our, probably even our notion of salvation has come to be understood as instant. We want salvation, but we want it cheap and convenient. We do not want to pay the cost of discipleship because we do not want to bear our crosses. We are called the generation of shortcuts, of cutting corners, the generation of instants. And then Cardinal Chito used the example of his experience as a teacher. He said, in the not so distant past, we had to do our school requirements how? By using typewriters. Sino na nakaabot ng typewriters? When I was in college, I did my own papers, my own research and reflection papers using the typewriter. And what happens when you use a typewriter? When you make a mistake and the teacher says, or if the teacher doesn't like a whole paragraph, an entire paragraph of your paper and says, you change it, you have to retype the whole paper from the beginning. Napakahirap. But today, what happens? Because you have computers, you have Microsoft Word, you just delete that part and modify it to your liking. But you know what's happening? Today, the presentation of papers are very nice, is very nice. The cover is very colorful. The way the papers are produced are extremely beautiful. The printing is very sharp. But then when you read the paper, you don't have any substance at all. All form, but no substance. It's heartbreaking. I'm also teaching in the seminary, and it breaks my heart every time. Many students just copy from the internet. Plagiarism is real. Because it's easy. You just go to Google, type your topic, copy and paste. In the past, you have to go to the library, open books. Sometimes you trigger your rhinitis because of the dust in the library. But you have to go through it because you have no internet, you have no computer to do it for you. But imagine, because of the cross that you have to go through, you produce something that is of substance. Cardinal Chito said, there is no substance without the cross. And then again, Rolheiser would say something similar. He would say, there is a certain depth of soul that can be attained through a certain depth of humiliation. In other words, some kind of depth is possible only when we have known some kind of pain. So our pains give us wrinkles, and our wrinkles are manifestations of depth. So don't hide them, Atibe. Don't hide them. These are badges of depth. Rolheiser would say, uh, paradoxically, a certain depth of soul can only be attained through a certain depth of humiliation. It isn't easy to articulate this rationally, but we can understand it through experience. You can ask yourself the question with courage and honesty, what experiences in my life have made me deep? In virtually every case, he says, experiences that have deepened you will be incidents that you feel some shame in acknowledging, a powerlessness from which you are unable to protect yourself, an abuse from which you could not defend yourself, an inadequacy of the body or the mind that has left you vulnerable, a humiliating incident that once happened to you, or some mistake that you made which was publicly exposed. And all of us, like Jesus, somehow we experience being hung up publicly and humiliated. And the depth of the humiliation, he says, is directly proportional to the depth of character that develops. Uh, Mahirap sabihin ito, no? But when I left for studies in Rome, uh, I thought I was bright. No? I thought I was good enough to study. And then classes started in Italian. Mamma mia, che difficile questa vita. Hindi mo maintindihan. And for the first few months, I would go to school and come home with my head heavy, always with a headache. Why? Because you constantly try to catch up what was being said, and you end up not really understanding anything. And you know what? It was very humbling. Very humbling. When I came back, I was kinder to my students. Because sometimes people have difficulties. And sometimes it is only when you go through the same similar difficulty that you understand what they are going through. To some extent, our sufferings forces us in some ways to become humble ourselves. Diba? It is only when you fail that you become more understanding of those who fail as well. Kaya mahirap pag masyadong magaling eh. At walang pinagdadaan ng pagkabigo. Because you become very demanding, you become very strict, you become unable to give considerations because you have always been perfect, at least to your mind. But people are not the same. And it is only when we go through difficulties ourselves that we know how to grow in compassion. I don't know if I should say this again, no, but Whenever we have retreats among the clergy and the floor is open to confession for priests with fellow priests, you know what we do? And this is our secret. We go to priests who have been publicly exposed in some sense to have had failures in the ministry. And you know what? The magic of words of wounded priests is always very powerful. Because when you go to confess to them, you experience the compassion of Jesus. Minsan kasi pag nangumpisal ka sa perfect na pari, ano nangyayari? Pagagalitan ka laang. But in many instances, when you listen to the wisdom and depth of someone who went through a difficult experience himself, then you feel the understanding. You feel the compassion of Christ. Okay, it's 10:30. We will end our short reflection with some guides, some suggestions for your quiet time and prayer. You can start reflecting and praying immediately after the talk because Leila would give us a few moments of quiet. But these are suggestions for you. The first suggested question for reflection and prayer is, what are the crosses that you carry today? By crosses, I mean not only the problems, but maybe also the responsibilities or anything that somehow burdens you. What are the crosses that you carry today? And then you ask yourself, what has suffering done to you? The truth of the matter is, suffering is like a double-edged sword. It can make you a better person, or it can transform you into the worst version of yourself. Diba? When you are hurt, it can bring about depth in character. It can bring about deeper understanding, graciousness, forgiveness. But getting hurt can also be a reason for people to be angry, to become bitter, to seek revenge, and to do all sorts of violence against each other. In your case, what has suffering done to you? Has it made you a better person? Or you have become worse? Ang image ni Rollheiser is, when you are crucified, when you stretch your hands in crucifixion, you create a space inside your heart. Now, what is it that fills in the space? Is it virtues or bitterness? Finally, What is the Lord telling you in prayer? What is God's personal invitation for you? What is the Lord's message for you today?